She was a third-generation officer, born into a family of law and order. But in less than 2 years, Sarah Langford would trade her shiny silver badge for a prison cell and a sex offender label. What drove this legacy daughter to throw it all away for 5 different inmates? This is her downfall.
Sarah Langford never truly envisioned any other life path for herself than the one that had been meticulously paved by her ancestors over many decades. In the small provincial town of Waycross, Georgia, where any local news travels much faster than the dry wind over the southern pastures, the Langford surname had always been inextricably linked with the concepts of iron order and strict prison discipline. Her father had dedicated 22 long years of his life to the Georgia Department of Corrections, serving faithfully as an officer in charge of transporting the most dangerous categories of criminals. Sarah's older brother, without any hesitation, followed that same proven route, entering the hazardous service at Ware State Prison immediately after receiving his high school diploma. Before we continue with this incredible story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. We release new investigative true crime videos every single week, so don't forget to turn on the bell notifications to stay updated. For young Sarah, working within the harsh correctional system was never a matter of personal choice or a high calling. It was, as often said in their home, the family business. However, her personal journey toward the shiny officer's badge turned out to be not nearly as smooth or heroic as the stories of the men in her family. After graduating from Ware County High School in 2018, with a very mediocre grade point average of 2.88, Sarah suddenly found herself at a difficult crossroads. At that moment, there was simply no clear vector in her life. Her first attempt to obtain a higher education at a local community college ended in a complete and rapid failure. Having lasted only 1 academic semester, she dropped out, citing financial difficulties and a total lack of interest in sciences. The next few years became a series of random and gray jobs for the future prison employee, which did not fit the image of a strict guardian of the law. She spent 8 consecutive months serving orders at a Waffle House and then moved to exhausting night shifts at a huge distribution center where she loaded heavy trucks. This monotonous life continued until March 2021, when Sarah, having just celebrated her 21st birthday, decided it was time to return to her roots. She filed an official application with the Georgia Department of Corrections. There was nothing outstanding in her profile, no criminal past, no special talents. However, the family factor played its decisive role. During the interview, officers emphasized that a girl from a family with such strong law enforcement traditions was simply bound to cope with this burden. On May 3, 2021, Sarah Langford was officially hired to serve at Coastal State Prison, located near Savannah. Coastal is a massive facility on 2,400 acres, housing 1,400 inmates. Sarah successfully completed the training course, although instructors noted that she was easily distracted and faltered in scenarios requiring tough confrontation. Despite this, on June 21, 2021, she first crossed the prison threshold as a full officer. After completing her basic training, Sarah Langford was officially assigned to D Block at Coastal State Prison. This environment was a stark and brutal departure from the calm, orderly descriptions she had grown up hearing from her father over family dinners for many years. D Block was widely regarded as one of the most volatile and unpredictable units within the entire facility. It housed inmates under close custody, many of whom were serving long, heavy sentences for violent felonies. The air was thick with hidden aggression, and the tension between the staff and the incarcerated men was almost physically palpable. It was expected that a young officer would display a certain toughness and professional resolve. Yet it was precisely here that the first fatal cracks began to appear in her conduct. Instead of maintaining the required distance and a cold, professional neutrality, Sarah began to show some inmates an excessive level of attention that quickly spiraled into a dangerous game. Her immediate supervisor, Sergeant Marcus Ballard, later recalled in his formal testimony that Sarah lingered far too often at the bars of specific individual cells. She engaged in long, private conversations that clearly went beyond the scope of standard operating procedures or necessary work talk. These initial violations seemed almost innocent at first glance. Sarah began bringing inmates small gifts from the employee commissary. Chocolate bars and extra portions of snacks became her way of buying the favor and affection of those on the other side of the bars. She justified this as a lack of experience and a naive desire to build a trusting rapport to maintain order. But the seasoned criminals quickly identified her internal weakness. Simultaneously, Sarah began to demonstrate a chilling level of calculation for a rookie. She spent hours studying patrol schedules and scanned the prison corridors with precision. She learned exactly when the surveillance camera lenses turned away and which specific corners of the maintenance rooms remained invisible to the operators in the monitoring center. This technical knowledge became her primary tool for flagrantly violating the rules. The first physical intimate contacts occurred in late August 2021, only 2 months after she started. Her focus fell on inmate number 1, a 27-year-old man serving time for armed robbery. It was with him that she first crossed the line of professional ethics, beginning to exchange private Instagram messages directly during her active shift. Sarah knowingly took a massive risk, mistakenly believing that her family status and background would shield her from any suspicion from her fellow officers. Her confidence in her own perceived invincibility grew with each passing day, pushing her toward even bolder and more reckless actions within those gray concrete walls. By the late autumn of 2021, the secret life of Sarah Langford within the gray, oppressive walls of Coastal State Prison had expanded into a complex and incredibly dangerous web of illicit relationships. What had started as a single reckless fascination with one specific inmate rapidly spiraled into a systemic, calculated pattern of misconduct involving multiple incarcerated men simultaneously. Investigation records would later reveal that Sarah was no longer satisfied with just one connection. She began seeking out constant attention from at least 5 different inmates across various housing units. Her professional identity as a third-generation officer was now nothing more than a convenient mask, which she used to navigate the facility while hiding her true, dark intentions from her unsuspecting colleagues. She became bolder with every passing week, transforming the very corridors she was supposed to patrol into a personal stage for her private encounters. Sarah felt an intense adrenaline rush from the constant danger of being caught, which only fueled her desire to push the boundaries much further. She was convinced that her family name would always protect her from any official scrutiny or internal suspicion. The digital evidence found later by the investigators painted a disturbing picture of a young woman who had completely lost her moral compass and respect for the law. Sarah spent a significant portion of her shifts on the prison's secure floor, huddled over her personal smartphone, sending provocative photos and explicit messages to her favorites through illegal devices smuggled into the cells. Her interactions were no longer just about emotional support or small favors. They had become deeply physical and highly transactional in nature. She utilized the blind spots she had so carefully mapped out during her first months on the job to arrange brief, clandestine meetings in dark storage closets and unoccupied laundry areas. Despite the high-risk environment and the constant presence of other guards, Sarah believed she was untouchable because of her legendary last name. She convinced herself that the loyalty of the inmates she was involved with would protect her secrets forever. Little did she know that the very men she was risking her career for would eventually become the primary witnesses against her when the internal investigation finally began to close in on her activities. Her double life was about to collapse in a spectacular fashion. The meticulously constructed facade of Sarah Langford's professional life within the Georgia Department of Corrections began to crumble during the autumn of 2022, primarily due to a biological reality that no amount of deception could ultimately conceal. Her physical health had started to decline visibly, leading her to take frequent and largely unexplained sick leaves that quickly triggered a formal review by the facility's Human Resources Department. During a routine administrative examination of her submitted medical documentation, a particularly observant clerk noticed recurring and highly specific entries regarding prenatal vitamins and multiple pregnancy-related consultations. This unexpected discovery acted as a massive catalyst for a comprehensive internal investigation that would soon expose the full, disturbing extent of her professional betrayal. The prison administration, suddenly realizing the catastrophic security implications of a pregnant guard working in a high-security unit, immediately initiated an incredibly deep dive into Sarah's daily activities and her suspicious movements within the notorious housing unit D. This was the very location where she had spent a significant portion of her unsupervised time interacting with the incarcerated population, far away from the watchful eyes of her fellow correctional officers and supervisors. The investigation took a dark and definitive turn when internal affairs investigators began systematically questioning the specific men Sarah had been most closely associated with during her shifts. Under the mounting pressure of potential new criminal charges, one prominent inmate finally cracked, confessing to a long-term physical relationship with Sarah and pointing towards another prisoner as the highly likely father of her unborn child. The ultimate, undeniable confirmation came through a court-ordered DNA test, which proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that an incarcerated felon was indeed the biological father of the child she was carrying. This undeniable scientific evidence stripped away any remaining defense Sarah might have had, revealing a truly shocking level of systemic failure and personal misconduct that horrified the entire community. She had not only violated every professional rule in the handbook, but had literally brought the physical consequences of her illicit affairs into her own body, creating a scandal of unprecedented proportions. The news of the pregnancy sent massive shockwaves through the entire Georgia prison system, marking the definitive beginning of the end for the young officer who had once been seen as a promising addition to a respected law enforcement dynasty. Her family's long-standing reputation was now permanently tarnished by her reckless actions and the undeniable truth of her betrayal. The inevitable moment of reckoning finally arrived on the morning of November 17th, 2022, a date that would forever mark the absolute collapse of Sarah Langford's career and reputation. As she arrived for her shift, unsuspecting and unprepared, she was intercepted on the prison parking lot by a team of determined investigators from the Internal Affairs Division. The entire encounter was captured in chilling detail on the chest-mounted body cameras of the arresting officers, providing a raw and unfiltered look at the moment her double life was permanently shattered. On the footage, the once confident officer appeared remarkably small and vulnerable, her composure instantly evaporating as the cold reality of the handcuffs pressing against her wrists became real. Sarah began to sob uncontrollably, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and exhaustion as she realized that her family's legendary influence could no longer shield her from the consequences of her actions. Between heavy gasps and streams of tears, she made several spontaneous admissions, repeatedly stating to the officers that she had made so many devastating mistakes and never intended for things to spiral so far out of her control. This public display of grief was a stark contrast to the professional image she had projected for over a year, revealing a young woman who had become completely lost in the dangerous world she was supposed to guard. The arrest was not conducted behind closed doors. It happened in the open air of the facility's grounds, serving as a grim warning to every other staff member present that morning. As she was escorted to a waiting patrol vehicle, the weight of her betrayal seemed to physically bow her shoulders. Sarah was no longer an officer of the law protected by a badge. She was now a high-profile suspect entering the very system she had so fundamentally compromised. The recorded confession on the parking lot would later become a central piece of evidence, documenting the exact second her entitlement vanished and was replaced by the terrifying uncertainty of a future spent behind bars as a convicted felon and a disgraced daughter of a law enforcement dynasty. The legal consequences for Sarah Langford reached their grim and unavoidable climax in April 2023, when she appeared in a packed courtroom to face the final judgment for her extensive crimes. By this time, the scandalous details of her multiple affairs and the subsequent pregnancy had become a matter of intense public record, leaving her with no room for further denial or legal maneuvering. Standing before the bench, Sarah officially entered a guilty plea to all charges, including multiple counts of sexual assault against persons in custody and several serious violations of her oath as a public officer. The presiding judge did not hold back during the sentencing phase, delivering a scathing assessment of her conduct that echoed throughout the silent courtroom. He described her actions as utterly reprehensible, emphasizing that she had not only endangered the safety of the entire correctional facility, but had also deeply tarnished the sacred trust that the community places in law enforcement officers. The judge noted that her background as a third-generation officer made her betrayal even more significant, as she understood better than anyone the gravity of the rules she chose to shatter for her own personal gratification. The tension in the room was palpable as the final sentence was read aloud. Sarah was sentenced to serve 4 years in state prison, followed by a lengthy and restrictive period of supervised probation. Furthermore, the court mandated that she be registered as a sexual offender for the rest of her life, a permanent legal scarlet letter that would follow her long after her physical release. As the bailiffs moved forward to escort her from the room, the reality of the situation finally settled over her like a heavy shroud. Sarah Langford was no longer the daughter of a respected law enforcement family. She was now a convicted criminal, destined to serve time in the very same system where she had once held absolute power over others. The sentence served as a definitive and painful conclusion to a career that had been utterly destroyed by a total lack of moral character and professional integrity. The aftermath of Sarah Langford's conviction brought a series of painful life changes that served as a permanent reminder of her catastrophic choices. In February 2023, just months before her final sentencing, Sarah gave birth to a baby girl, a child whose very existence was the central evidence of a massive institutional scandal. The joy typically associated with a new arrival was completely overshadowed by the cold reality of Sarah's impending incarceration. Because of her prison sentence, she was forced to experience the earliest moments of motherhood under the watchful eye of the state, eventually having to hand her daughter over to her own mother for long-term care. While the child is being raised in a stable environment, she will grow up knowing her father only as a nameless inmate, and her mother as a disgraced former officer serving time in a neighboring facility. This tragic separation is perhaps the heaviest price Sarah has had to pay for her vanity and recklessness. If you're finding this investigation impactful, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. It helps us continue bringing these complex stories to light. Currently, Sarah is serving her 4-year term. Experiencing the harsh realities of the Georgia prison system from the other side of the bars she once patrolled. She is no longer an authority figure, but a number in a vast database, subjected to the same rigid schedules and loss of privacy that she once used as a tool of power. Her father and brother, once proud of their family's law enforcement legacy, must now navigate their own professional lives under the shadow of her public shame. The name Langford, which was once synonymous with integrity and service in the community, has been forever transformed into a chilling cautionary tale studied by new recruits. Sarah is scheduled for release in 2027, but the world she returns to will be vastly different from the one she left behind. As a registered sex offender with a ruined reputation, the path to redemption will be incredibly long and difficult. Her story remains a stark warning about the total collapse of morality and the devastating speed at which a legacy can be destroyed when professional boundaries are replaced by personal desires within the dangerous vacuum of a prison cell.